I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 32 years old, and I never expected my birthday would end with me detonating my entire family dynamic. The cake was perfect, vanilla with buttercream frosting, my favorite since childhood. Everyone was there: Mom, Dad, my younger brother Marcus in his designer clothes. That's when my mother leaned in close, the candles illuminating her judgmental expression, and whispered those words that changed everything: "You're jealous of your brother." The shock froze me before the flames could even flicker. 10 seconds later, I snapped back with 6 words that shattered 20 years of family tradition. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and let me know in the comments, have you ever had a family member accuse you of something that pushed you over the edge? The Mitchells of suburban Boston were the picture of middle-class success from the outside. My father Robert worked as an engineering manager, my mother Patricia taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, and we lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial with a well-tended garden my mother spent weekends perfecting. But within those walls, a pattern had established itself long before I could recognize it. From my earliest memories, I was the responsible one. I babysat neighborhood kids at 12, maintained straight A's throughout school, and started working part-time at 16 at the local bookstore. My room was always organized, my homework completed without reminders, and I rarely caused my parents any trouble. This wasn't just my natural personality, it was a role I learned to play when I realized the stark difference in how my brother and I were treated. Marcus is 2 years younger, and from the moment he could throw a ball, he became the golden child. Where I was expected to excel, he was praised for minimal effort. When he broke Mom's favorite vase playing indoor baseball at age 9, she laughed and called him spirited. When I accidentally stained the carpet with nail polish at 11, I was grounded for a week for not being careful enough. "Marcus is just being a boy," my father would say, ruffling his hair after another school report showing underperformance. "He'll figure it out when he's ready." My mother's bias was even more apparent. When I made the honor roll for the 8th consecutive semester in high school, she nodded and said, "That's expected." When Marcus got a B+ in English, his highest grade that year, she took him out for ice cream to celebrate. The pattern continued in bigger ways as we got older. When I graduated high school, I asked for help buying a car. "We've put aside money for your college," they said. "You'll need to save for your own car." I spent that summer working double shifts to afford a used Honda with 120,000 miles. 2 years later, when Marcus graduated, my parents surprised him with a new Jeep Cherokee wrapped in a giant bow in the driveway. "He needs reliable transportation," my mother explained when she saw my expression. "Besides, he's going to state, so we can afford to help him with a car." College brought more of the same. I received partial scholarships, but took out substantial loans to attend a private university. Marcus went to state with a mediocre GPA but had every expense covered: tuition, apartment, meal plan, and a generous monthly allowance. When I asked about the discrepancy, my mother said, "You're so capable, Cassandra. Marcus needs more support to find his way." These experiences shaped me in ways I didn't fully understand until adulthood. I became fiercely independent, refused to ask for help, and built my identity around self-sufficiency. After college, I worked my way up at a tech company, ultimately becoming a project manager with a salary that allowed me to live comfortably in my own apartment, pay off my student loans, and build a modest savings account. My hyperindependence became my armor, and I took pride in never needing assistance from anyone, especially my family. I maintained cordial but distant relations with my parents, joining mandatory family dinners twice a month, where Marcus's latest endeavors were the main topic of conversation. He bounced between jobs, always with a new scheme or startup idea that my parents funded with enthusiasm. "He's finding his passion," they'd say, while I silently calculated how much of their retirement fund his finding was costing them. Then 3 months ago, the tech industry contraction hit my company hard. Despite my performance reviews and years of service, I was part of a massive layoff that eliminated my entire department. At 32, I found myself unemployed for the first time since I was 16. I had savings, but not enough to weather a prolonged job search in a tightening market. For 2 months, I tried to manage on my own, applying to hundreds of positions, cutting expenses to the bone, and watching my carefully built safety net unravel week by week. When my car needed an unexpected repair that drained the last of my liquid savings, I faced a choice I never wanted to make: ask my parents for temporary help or risk losing my apartment and damaging my previously perfect credit score. The conversation with my parents was one of the most difficult of my life. My father seemed genuinely concerned, while my mother's eyes held a hint of satisfaction that her ultra-independent daughter finally needed assistance. They agreed to help with my rent, utilities, and minimum credit card payments until I found a new position. "Family helps family," my father said kindly. "Of course we'll help," my mother added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everyone struggles sometimes." I didn't realize then that accepting their help would come with a price far higher than my monthly bills. The first payment from my parents arrived with a card: "Happy to help until you get back on your feet." It was a lifeline that kept my lights on and roof overhead, but by the second month, the subtext of their assistance became increasingly difficult to ignore. "Did you follow up on that administrative assistant position?" my mother asked during our weekly family dinner, though she knew I had been a senior project manager. Sometimes we need to humble ourselves. My father would check in with seemingly innocent questions. "Any luck with the job hunt today, Cass?" But his tone carried the implication that perhaps I wasn't trying hard enough. Meanwhile, Marcus would arrive late to dinner in his new Audi, regaling everyone with stories from his recent weekend in Miami. "It was exactly what I needed after the stress of trying to launch the app," he explained, while our parents nodded sympathetically. The app was his third failed business venture they had funded in 5 years. "Marcus has such vision," Mom would say, passing him seconds before anyone else was offered more food. Sometimes the market just isn't ready for innovative ideas. What stung most wasn't that they were helping him too, it was the stark contrast in how they treated our respective financial situations. My temporary need for assistance after a corporate layoff was treated as a personal failure, while his chronic inability to support himself was framed as brave entrepreneurship. The financial arrangement itself was straightforward. They paid my rent, $1,850, utilities, averaging $210 monthly, and the minimum payments on my 2 credit cards, $120 combined, directly to the companies. I handled everything else: food, gas, phone, insurance, and continuing to search for employment. Each transaction came with commentary, usually via text from my mother. "Rent payment sent. Have you considered looking for a more affordable place?" "Utility bill paid. Remember to turn off lights when you leave rooms." "Credit card payment made. You might want to freeze that card until you're employed again." Each suggestion conveyed the same message: I had failed at adulting and now required both financial assistance and basic life advice. I bit my tongue and responded with thank you texts, knowing I had no alternative. My job search grew increasingly demoralizing. I'd advanced to final round interviews 4 times, only to be told they'd chosen candidates with more recent experience. The job market had shifted dramatically since my last search years ago, with positions receiving hundreds of qualified applicants. I expanded my search parameters, applied to roles below my previous level, and reached out to every contact in my network. Meanwhile, my savings continued to dwindle despite my increasingly austere lifestyle. I canceled streaming services, stopped ordering takeout, sold clothes and electronics I didn't absolutely need, and calculated the cost of every grocery item before putting it in my cart. The weekly family dinners became exercises in humiliation. My mother would ask for updates on my job search in front of everyone, then sigh dramatically at my reports of rejection. My father would offer well-intentioned, but outdated job hunting advice from his era when people could walk into offices with printed resumes and ask to speak to managers. Marcus, for his part, seemed oblivious to the dynamics. He'd show up late, sometimes skipping dinners entirely when something more interesting came up. When he did attend, he'd talk about his plans for a new business venture, a boutique fitness concept this time, that would require just a bit of startup capital. "We believe in investing in our children's futures," my mother said when I asked, as delicately as possible, how they could afford to fund both his business and my basic needs. "Your situation is temporary, but Marcus is building something." The night before my birthday, I received a promising email. A company I'd interviewed with twice was bringing me in for a final meeting with the executive team. The position paid slightly more than my previous job and offered growth potential. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that my dependence on my parents might soon end. I didn't mention the potential job at my birthday dinner the next day. After months of sharing disappointments, I wanted to wait until I had definite good news. Instead, I focused on helping my mother prepare the meal and set the table, hoping for a celebration that might briefly distract from the financial cloud hanging over my life. Little did I know that this birthday dinner would become the breaking point that changed everything. My birthday fell on a Saturday this year, which meant the traditional family dinner would be at my parents' house rather than a restaurant. I arrived 2 hours early to help my mother prepare, a tradition started in my teens that had somehow survived into adulthood. As I approached the kitchen door, I heard my mother's voice through the partially open window. "I'm worried about Cassandra," she said to my father. "She's 32 today and hasn't figured out how to maintain stable employment. Marcus is younger and already showing such entrepreneurial spirit. Patricia, she was laid off in a corporate downsizing." "That's hardly her fault," my father replied, though his defense lacked conviction. "Still, she should have had more savings or connections to find something new right away. When I was her age, I had you, a home, and a career." I stood frozen on the back step, my gift bag dangling from suddenly numb fingers. Before I could decide whether to retreat or make my presence known, my father glanced up and saw me through the window. "Cassandra's here," he announced, his voice artificially bright. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of cooking and strained conversation. My mother asked about my employment situation 3 separate times, each question framed differently, but seeking the same confirmation of my failure. I answered with forced cheerfulness, focusing on the promising interview rather than the 97 rejection emails in my inbox. At 5:30, the doorbell rang. Marcus bounded in, 45 minutes late, carrying a small gift bag from an expensive boutique. "Happy birthday, sis," he said, kissing my cheek and handing me the package. Inside was a scarf from a luxury brand, beautiful but completely impractical for my current lifestyle. The price tag he'd forgotten to remove showed it cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Thanks, Marcus." "It's lovely," I said, carefully refolding it into the tissue paper. Dinner consisted of my favorite childhood meal, roast chicken with my mother's special herb stuffing, mashed potatoes, and green beans with almonds. The conversation, however, quickly turned to Marcus's fitness studio concept. "I've found the perfect location," he explained, gesturing with his wine glass. "It's in the trendy part of downtown, so the rent is steep, but the demographic is exactly right for high-end fitness." "That sounds promising," my mother beamed. "Location is everything in retail." "How much capital do you need to start?" my father asked, reaching for the potatoes. "About $70,000 for the initial build-out and equipment," Marcus replied casually. "Plus operating costs for the first 6 months while we build clientele." I nearly choked on my water. That was more than my annual salary at my last position. "We'll need to look at our investments," my father mused, "but I think we can make it work." I stared at my plate, fighting the urge to ask how they could consider investing that sum in another of Marcus's ventures while simultaneously sending me texts about my electricity usage. The conversation continued around me as I silently calculated how many months of my expenses that money could cover. When it came time for cake, my father stood to make a toast. To Cassandra on her 32nd birthday, he began, raising his glass. "We're proud of you and know you'll bounce back soon." He paused before adding, "And we're excited about Marcus's new business venture. To both our children finding their paths." The cake appeared, vanilla with buttercream frosting, decorated with purple flowers and "Happy Birthday, Cassandra" in elegant script. As tradition dictated, I closed my eyes to make a wish before blowing out the candles. I wished, simply and desperately, for financial independence. As I leaned forward toward the flickering candles, my mother moved closer under the guise of helping me steady the cake. That's when she whispered in my ear, her voice soft but clear. "You're jealous of your brother." I froze, the breath I'd drawn to extinguish the candles caught in my throat. In that moment, all the accumulated resentment, frustration, and hurt crystallized into perfect clarity. The flame of the candles reflected in my widened eyes as I turned to look at her. "Then let him pay your bills," I replied, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. The room fell silent. My father's fork clattered against his plate. Marcus looked up from his phone, suddenly aware that something significant had happened. "Excuse me," my mother said, her face flushing. I said, "If you think I'm jealous of Marcus, then let him pay my bills instead of you. He's got $70,000 for a business venture. Surely he can spare $2,000 for his sister's rent and utilities." "Cassandra, that's uncalled for," my father interjected. "Your mother was just." "Just what, Dad?" "Just implying that my financial struggle after a layoff is because I'm envious of my brother's lifestyle? The brother who's never held a job longer than 8 months? The brother who's about to get another massive investment, while I'm made to feel guilty for needing help with basic necessities?" My mother's face hardened. "You've always been dramatic, Cassandra." "I simply meant that you seem resentful of the opportunities Marcus creates for himself." "Creates for himself?" I laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. "He doesn't create opportunities. You and Dad create them, fund them, and excuse them when they inevitably fail. Meanwhile, I lose my job through no fault of my own after years of success, and suddenly I'm a disappointment." "That's not fair," my father began, but I was beyond stopping. "What's not fair is how you've treated us differently our entire lives. What's not fair is Marcus getting a new car for graduation while I work double shifts for a used one. What's not fair is you paying his college entirely while I'm still paying off student loans at 32. What's not fair is you making me feel like a failure for needing temporary help while planning to give him $70,000 for another business that will probably fail like all the others." Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Cass, I don't think." "You don't think, Marcus. That's the problem. You don't think about how your actions affect others because you've never had to. Everything has always been handed to you." I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The candles on my cake still burned, wax dripping onto the perfect frosting. "I don't want your help anymore," I said, gathering my purse and the scarf Marcus had given me. "I'll figure it out on my own, like I always have." "Cassandra Mitchell, you sit back down this instant," my mother commanded, her teacher voice emerging. "We do not leave family dinners in the middle of celebrations." "This isn't a celebration, Mom. It's another opportunity for you to remind me how I don't measure up to your golden child." With that, I walked out, leaving my birthday cake untouched, candles still burning. As I drove home, tears streaming down my face, I made a decision that would permanently alter my relationship with my family. I was done being the responsible daughter who still wasn't good enough. If independence was the only way to earn respect, then independent I would be completely and irrevocably. I woke the next morning with swollen eyes and complete clarity. The hurt and anger had crystallized into determination overnight. Before even making coffee, I grabbed a notebook and began outlining my financial independence plan with methodical precision. First, I calculated exactly how long my remaining savings would last if I covered all expenses myself. 6 weeks at current spending levels, potentially 8 if I made further cuts. Not ideal, but not impossible either. Next, I researched emergency loans against my 401k. While financial advisors universally warned against this option, the 10% early withdrawal penalty seemed a small price to pay for regaining my autonomy. I could access enough to cover 3 additional months of expenses if necessary. By 9 a.m., I had a detailed spreadsheet and action plan. I started with the utilities, calling each company to switch the accounts back to my name effective immediately. The customer service representative seemed confused by my urgency on a Sunday morning, but I insisted on processing the changes right away. Yes, I understand there may be a service interruption, I told the electricity provider. That's acceptable. With the utilities handled, I contacted my apartment management company to inform them I would resume paying my own rent starting with the next payment due. I arranged for automatic withdrawal from my checking account, effectively locking myself into this decision. The credit card companies were last. I not only transferred responsibility for payments back to myself, but also requested new cards with different numbers to ensure my parents couldn't make payments even if they wanted to. By noon, I had systematically disconnected every financial line between myself and my parents. My phone had accumulated 17 missed calls and 23 text messages during this process. Most from my mother, a few from my father, and, surprisingly, 2 from Marcus. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on intensifying my job search. I emailed every contact in my professional network, explicitly asking for leads or referrals. I updated my LinkedIn profile and portfolio website. I researched companies that were still actively hiring despite the economic downturn and tailored applications for each. The afternoon was dedicated to budget cuts. I listed furniture, electronics, and designer clothes I could sell quickly. I calculated the exact caloric needs for a single adult female and planned the most economical meal prep strategy. I identified side gigs I could start immediately, driving for rideshare services, freelance project management, virtual assistant work, anything to generate income while pursuing full-time employment. As evening approached, my phone continued to buzz with notifications, but my resolve remained unshaken. I was prepared for the inevitable confrontation, but it would happen on my terms, not theirs. I drafted and redrafted what I would say when I finally answered their calls, practicing a delivery that was firm but not emotional. Just as I was reviewing my budget one final time, a text from Marcus caught my attention. "Cass, whatever's going on between you and Mom and Dad, I'm sorry if I made it worse. Can we talk? Just us." I hesitated before replying, "Not ready to talk yet. Working through some things. We'll reach out when I am." His response surprised me. Fair enough. For what it's worth, what Mom said was wrong. You've always been the capable one, not the jealous one. I set my phone down without replying, unsure what to make of this unexpected support from my brother. It was the first time in our adult lives he had acknowledged the differential treatment, even indirectly. That night, I made a simple dinner from pantry staples and ate at my small kitchen table, surrounded by spreadsheets and job listings. The apartment felt different somehow, smaller, but also more completely mine. Every bill would be paid with my money, every decision made without input or judgment from my parents. There was fear, certainly. My financial runway was perilously short, and the job market remained challenging. But beneath the anxiety ran a current of something I hadn't felt in months: dignity. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms, without the suffocating weight of familial obligation and comparison. I went to bed early, knowing I needed to be sharp for the final interview scheduled for Tuesday. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized I had made no wish when I left my birthday candles burning. Now I knew exactly what I would have wished for, not just financial independence, but the courage to maintain it, whatever the cost. The inevitable confrontation came 3 days after my birthday. I had just returned from a promising job interview, the one with the executive team, when I saw my parents' SUV parked outside my apartment building. Marcus's Audi was there too, which surprised me. I briefly considered driving past and returning later, but decided it was better to face this head-on. They were sitting in my small living room when I unlocked the door, my mother perched rigidly on the edge of the sofa, my father looking uncomfortable in the armchair, and Marcus leaning against the wall near the window. My mother must have used her emergency key, the one I'd given her years ago, for genuine emergencies, not emotional ambushes. "This is unexpected," I said, setting down my interview portfolio on the counter. I remained standing, maintaining physical distance that matched the emotional gap between us. My mother spoke first, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Unexpected? You shut down all the accounts without a word, ignored our calls for days, and you think our visit is unexpected." "Patricia," my father cautioned, placing a hand on her arm. He turned to me with his mediator expression, the same one he'd used during countless childhood disputes. "Cassandra, we're concerned. Your behavior at your birthday and then cutting off communication, it's not like you." "Exactly what part isn't like me, Dad? The standing up for myself part?" "Because you're right, that's new." My mother's posture stiffened further. "This isn't about standing up for yourself. This is about basic gratitude and respect. We've been helping you financially, and this is how you repay us." I took a deep breath before responding, determined to remain calm. "I appreciate the financial help you provided, but it came with conditions I can no longer accept, specifically, being treated as less worthy than Marcus and being made to feel like a failure for needing temporary assistance." "We have never," my mother began, but I cut her off. "You have. My entire life. And it became unbearable when you whispered that I was jealous of Marcus over my birthday cake." Marcus shifted uncomfortably by the window. "Mom, did you really say that?" My mother waved dismissively. "I merely observed that Cassandra seemed resentful of your success. It wasn't meant as an attack." "My success?" Marcus laughed, a short, humorless sound. "I'm 30 years old living in an apartment you pay for, about to start my 4th failed business. What success exactly am I having that Cass should be jealous of?" The room fell silent. My father looked stunned, my mother flustered. I stared at my brother, seeing him with new eyes. "The point," I continued after a moment, "is that I've made a decision to handle my finances independently. I'm grateful for your help when I needed it, but I'm not comfortable with the dynamic it created." "And how exactly do you plan to pay your bills?" my mother asked. "You're unemployed, or have you forgotten? I have savings, and I'm pursuing multiple income streams while job hunting. I had a final interview today that went well." My father leaned forward. "Cassandra, there's no shame in accepting help during difficult times. We're your parents. That's what we're here for." "Is it? Because it feels like you're here to judge me, compare me to Marcus, and make me feel like I've failed at adulting because I lost my job in a market downturn. That's not fair," my mother snapped. "We've supported both of you equally." The absurdity of this statement hung in the air for a moment before I laughed out loud. "Equally? You paid for Marcus's entire education while I took out loans. You bought him a new car while I worked for a used one. You funded multiple failed business ventures for him while making me feel guilty for needing help with rent after losing my job. In what universe is that equal?" My father looked uncomfortable. "Different children have different needs, Cassandra. And somehow Marcus's needs always come first, cost more, and receive unconditional support, while mine are treated as character flaws to be overcome through tough love." My mother stood up, her face flushed. "I will not sit here and be accused of favoritism in my own daughter's home. It's not an accusation, Mom. It's a pattern of behavior that's existed my entire life. And to be clear, this is my home, paid for with my money from now on." Marcus surprised me by speaking up. "Mom, Dad, Cass isn't wrong. You've always treated us differently." My mother turned to him, betrayal written across her features. "Marcus, that's not true. We've given you both every opportunity." "No, you haven't," he said quietly. You've given me every advantage while expecting Cassandra to make her own opportunities. I didn't see it for years because it benefited me, but she's right. My father stood and placed his hands on my mother's shoulders. Perhaps we should all take some time to calm down and discuss this another day. There's nothing more to discuss, I said firmly. I've made my decision. I appreciate the help you provided when I needed it, but going forward, I'll manage on my own. And if you can't find a job, my mother challenged. If you can't pay your rent next month? What then? Then I'll figure it out. I'll take a lower paying position, get roommates, move to a cheaper apartment, whatever it takes. But I won't accept financial help with emotional strings attached. My parents exchanged glances before my father nodded slowly. We respect your decision, even if we don't agree with it. The door is always open if you change your mind. We should go, my mother said stiffly, gathering her purse. Clearly Cassandra needs space to think about her actions. They moved toward the door, my father placing a hesitant hand on my shoulder as he passed. Call us when you're ready to talk. I nodded but said nothing. As they stepped into the hallway, my mother turned back. Marcus, are you coming? He shook his head. I'll catch up with you later. I want to talk to Cass for a bit. After they left, Marcus and I stood in awkward silence for several moments before he spoke. I'm sorry, Cass. I didn't realize how different things were for us until recently. I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. It's not your fault. You didn't create the dynamic. No, but I benefited from it without questioning it. He sat beside me, maintaining a respectful distance. Can I ask what your plan is? Really? For the first time in years, I found myself having an honest conversation with my brother. I explained my financial calculations, job prospects, and backup plans. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. You know, he said when I finished, I've never actually had to make a budget or think about this kind of stuff. Mom and Dad have always just handled it. That's exactly the problem, Marcus. They handled everything for you and nothing for me. He was quiet for a moment. They're controlling my life too, just in a different way. I'm 30 and have no idea how to function without their money. At least you know how to stand on your own feet. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years, I'd envied his financial support while he'd envied my independence. We talked for another hour, unraveling years of parental manipulation neither of us had fully recognized until now. As he was leaving, Marcus turned at the door. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right call. And I'm going to try to follow your example. What do you mean? I'm going to get a real job instead of starting another business. Maybe learn how to actually support myself for once. I smiled, feeling a connection with my brother I hadn't experienced since childhood. I'd like that. After he left, I sat alone in my apartment, processing the confrontation and its unexpected outcomes. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in months, I felt something like hope, not just for my financial situation, but for the possibility of healthier family relationships built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The weeks following the confrontation were both liberating and terrifying. I had taken control of my narrative, but at a significant financial cost. Each morning began with job applications and networking emails, afternoons were spent interviewing or working side gigs, and evenings were dedicated to extreme budgeting. My parents maintained a chilly distance, communicating only through occasional text messages asking if I was doing all right. I responded with brief but polite updates, neither inviting nor rejecting their tentative outreach. The traditional family dinners were suspended by unspoken mutual agreement. Marcus, surprisingly, became a more regular presence in my life. He called several times a week, sometimes to check in, sometimes to ask basic, adulting questions I'd mastered years ago. How often am I supposed to change my address when I move? He asked one evening. Every time you move, Marcus. That's why it's called a change of address. Right, that makes sense. And how do I set up automatic payments for bills? These conversations revealed just how extensively our parents had infantilized him under the guise of support. He didn't know how to comparison shop for insurance, had never filed his own taxes, and couldn't remember the last time he'd managed his own banking. In helping him navigate these basics, I found an unexpected purpose during my unemployment. Meanwhile, my financial situation grew increasingly precarious. The promising interview led to a request for additional work samples, but no immediate offer. My emergency fund dwindled despite ruthless budget cuts. I sold my designer work wardrobe on consignment, keeping only enough professional clothes for interviews. My television, tablet, and several pieces of furniture followed, transforming my once comfortable apartment into a Spartan space containing only necessities. I signed up for rideshare driving, spending evenings and weekends shuttling strangers around the city. The irony wasn't lost on me when I occasionally drove young professionals to upscale restaurants I could no longer afford to enter. The work was exhausting but provided just enough income to stretch my savings a little further. 3 weeks after my birthday, my parents made their first attempt at reconciliation. My mother called on a Sunday afternoon, her voice carefully neutral. "We'd like to have you over for dinner tonight, Cassandra. Just to talk." I hesitated before responding. "Is there an agenda for this talk?" She sighed. "We're concerned about you. Your father and I have been discussing things, and we want to help, no strings attached this time." "I appreciate that, Mom, but I'm committed to handling this independently." "There's independence, and then there's prideful stubbornness, Cassandra. Which do you think this is?" I closed my eyes, counting to 10 before responding. "I'm not coming to dinner. When I'm ready to talk, I'll let you know." The following day brought a significant setback. My car, essential for the rideshare work that was keeping me afloat, made an ominous grinding noise and died at an intersection. The towing and diagnostic fees alone strained my budget, and the repair estimate was devastating, $1,800 for a transmission problem. For a brief, weak moment, I considered calling my parents. Instead, I researched public transportation routes and calculated how long my remaining savings would last without the rideshare income. The math was grim, but not impossible if I made even deeper cuts and found alternative income quickly. I listed my grandmother's pearl necklace, a graduation gift I'd promised myself I would never sell, on an online marketplace. It sold within hours for enough to cover half the car repair. I added my designer handbag collection, accumulated over years of career success, and raised the remaining amount plus a small buffer. The day I reclaimed my repaired car, I received a text from Marcus. "Got a job. Entry-level marketing position. Starts Monday." "That's great. Proud of you," I replied, genuinely pleased for him. "Thanks. Also, I'm moving to a cheaper apartment next month. Told Mom and Dad I'm covering my own rent from now on." This development surprised me more than his job announcement. In the month since our confrontation, Marcus had begun dismantling the Golden Child infrastructure more quickly than I'd imagined possible. That evening, after completing 3 rideshare trips, I received a call from Lisa, a former colleague who had left my company 6 months before the layoffs. "Cassandra, I've been trying to reach you. My team has an opening for a senior project manager. The listing goes public tomorrow, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The salary is 15% above market rate." My heart raced as she described the position, a perfect match for my skills and experience, with a company known for stability and growth potential. She arranged for me to meet with the hiring manager the following afternoon. As I prepared for the interview, I realized I had sold most of my professional wardrobe. I pieced together an acceptable outfit from remaining items, polished my worn but still professional shoes, and practiced interview answers until midnight. The next day, as I sat across from the hiring manager and department director, I drew on a well of confidence I hadn't accessed in months. When asked about handling challenging situations, I had fresh, relevant examples of resilience and resourcefulness from my unemployment journey. "We're looking for someone who can manage complex projects under pressure and adapt to changing circumstances," the director said. Your experience during this transition period actually demonstrates those qualities. I left the interview feeling cautiously optimistic, but forced myself to apply for 3 more positions that evening, unwilling to place all my hopes on a single opportunity. The following morning, my car wouldn't start again, a different problem this time, requiring another $600 repair I couldn't afford. As I sat in the mechanic's waiting room, calculating which bill payment I could defer to cover this new expense, my phone rang with an unknown number. Cassandra Mitchell? This is Elena from Vertex Solutions. We'd like to offer you the senior project manager position. The salary they named was not just 15% above market rate, as Lisa had mentioned, but 20% higher than my previous position. The benefits package included immediate health insurance coverage and a signing bonus that would replenish my depleted savings. I accepted on the spot, my voice steady despite the tears of relief threatening to fall. After confirming details and promising to sign the offer letter electronically that afternoon, I ended the call and finally allowed myself to cry brief, cathartic tears of exhaustion and triumph. That evening, I called my parents for the first time since our confrontation. "I've found a new job," I said when my father answered and put me on speakerphone. "I start next Monday." "That's wonderful news, Cassandra," he replied, genuine warmth in his voice. "Your mother and I are so pleased." "Does this mean you'll join us for dinner again?" my mother asked cautiously. "Eventually," I said. "But first, I think we need to have an honest conversation about our family dynamics, all 4 of us together." After a pause, my father responded, "We'd like that." "Name the time and place." I suggested a coffee shop, neutral territory, the following weekend. As I ended the call, I realized I was entering a new phase of adulthood, not just financial independence, but emotional independence as well. Whatever happened with my family going forward would happen on equal footing, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. The repair car bill wiped out the last of my savings, but it didn't matter anymore. In 1 week, I would receive my first paycheck from a position that valued my skills and experience even more than my previous employer had. I had weathered the financial storm without compromising my self-respect or returning to patterns of dependency that had shaped so much of my life. As I drove my newly repaired car home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The journey had been more difficult than I could have imagined when I stormed out of my birthday dinner, but the destination, true independence, was worth every sacrifice along the way. My first paycheck from Vertex Solutions arrived exactly 6 weeks after my ill-fated birthday dinner. I stared at the direct deposit notification on my phone, the number significantly higher than any previous payment I'd received. The immediate crisis had passed, but the experience had permanently altered my perspective on money, family, and self-worth. That evening, I treated myself to a modest celebration, takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant eaten at my nearly empty apartment, sitting on the one comfortable chair I hadn't sold. The food tasted like victory. The coffee shop meeting with my family took place the following Saturday. I arrived early to secure a table in the corner, providing some privacy for what promised to be a challenging conversation. Marcus arrived next, looking different in business casual attire instead of his usual designer clothes. 2 weeks into adult life, he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Turns out I'm not terrible at marketing." "I never thought you were terrible at anything, Marcus." Just under-challenged. Our parents arrived precisely on time, my mother's posture rigid with tension, my father's expression carefully neutral. After awkward greetings and coffee orders, we sat in uncomfortable silence until I decided to begin. "Thank you for coming. I wanted us to meet because I think we need to address some long-standing family patterns before we can move forward." My mother's lips thinned. "If this is another accusation session." "It's not," I interrupted gently. "It's a conversation about how we relate to each other as adults. I've had time to reflect on my reaction at my birthday, and while I stand by the decision I made, I could have communicated it differently." My father nodded encouragingly. We've done some reflecting too, Cassandra. We have, my mother admitted, surprising me. Your reaction forced us to consider some uncomfortable truths. Marcus leaned forward. Mom, Dad, you've always treated us differently. Cass has been pointing it out for years, but I never backed her up because it benefited me. That wasn't fair. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. We never meant to show favoritism. We just thought. Cassandra was so capable, so independent from such a young age. She didn't seem to need the same support you did, Marcus. But that's the problem, I explained. I became hyper-independent because I learned early that asking for help meant being judged or dismissed. It wasn't natural capability, it was adaptation to the family dynamic. My father reached for my mother's hand. We failed you both in different ways. We enabled Marcus's dependency while forcing you into self-sufficiency before you were ready. And when I finally did need help, I added, it came with judgment and comparison. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. When you asked for financial assistance, I felt vindicated somehow. Like finally, you weren't so perfect and independent. It was petty and wrong, and I'm sorry. Her admission stunned me into momentary silence. In 32 years, I had never heard my mother acknowledge a mistake so directly. What happens now? Marcus asked, looking between us. Now we establish healthier patterns, I said. I have a good job again. Marcus is building his independence. We're all adults who can choose the relationship we want to have. We'd like to be part of your lives, my father said, without the financial entanglements that complicated things. I'd like that too, I admitted, but with boundaries and respect for our different paths. We spent the next hour negotiating those boundaries, no unsolicited advice about careers or money, no comparisons between siblings, regular family dinners, but with rotating hosting duties. My mother struggled with some of the terms, but ultimately agreed. I'm proud of both of you, she said as we prepared to leave. Different as your paths have been, you've both shown remarkable strength these past weeks. The following month brought my 33rd birthday, a decidedly different celebration from the previous year. I hosted a small dinner at my apartment, which I had gradually refurnished with quality second-hand pieces. My parents brought a simple cake, Marcus contributed wine, and we managed an evening of genuine connection without the undercurrents of comparison that had poisoned so many gatherings before. As the months passed, our family dynamic continued to evolve. Marcus thrived in his marketing position, earning his first promotion within 6 months. He called occasionally with questions about negotiating benefits or contributing to retirement accounts, but increasingly made decisions independently. My parents adjusted to their new relationship with both of us, sometimes slipping into old patterns, but accepting redirection when it happened. My mother still occasionally made comments about my apartment being so practical compared to my previous place, but she no longer assumed financial decisions were hers to evaluate. My own career advanced rapidly at Vertex Solutions. The skills I developed during my period of unemployment, ruthless prioritization, creative problem-solving, grace under pressure, translated into exceptional project management. By my 1-year anniversary with the company, I had rebuilt my savings beyond their previous levels and begun investing aggressively for the future. The greatest change, however, was internal. I no longer measured my worth by my parents' approval or in comparison to my brother. The financial crisis had forced me to dismantle unhealthy patterns that had shaped my identity since childhood, replacing them with genuine self-reliance and clear boundaries. On the evening of my 34th birthday, I hosted another family dinner. As I prepared to blow out the candles on my cake, still vanilla with buttercream frosting, my mother leaned close. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, Cassandra, she whispered, this time with genuine admiration rather than judgment. I smiled, made a silent wish, and extinguished the flames in a single breath. Unlike 2 years before, I didn't need to wish for financial independence or family harmony. Instead, I wished for the wisdom to remember the lessons of that difficult period, even as its acute pain faded into memory. The journey from that devastating birthday whisper to this moment of peace had been arduous and often lonely. But as I looked around at my family, imperfect but evolving, I knew that sometimes the most painful conversations are the ones most worth having. Freedom, I had learned, wasn't just financial independence. It was the courage to define your own worth, set clear boundaries, and stand firmly in your truth, even when those you love most aren't ready to hear it. If you've ever had to make difficult choices to preserve your self-respect, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself when it would have been easier to stay silent? Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of personal growth through life's challenges, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most important act of self-care. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' perception of you, but by the integrity with which you navigate life's most challenging moments.